It sounds like it's getting a little better. All right, so to begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm currently located, which is the Gunung Mullumbuluk country at the base of Mount Macedon, about 60 kilometres north of Melbourne, part of the Kulin Nation. And invite you to give a nod to the traditional owners of your own, wherever you are. And to just come into your bodies, your breath, be here, and be present. What is a completely disembodied way of connecting. So it makes it a little bit hard. For those who don't know me, I'm come to storytelling via sort of a windy, circuitous route. I was a community lawyer for 17 years, and then was disenchanted with the law and wanted to build relationships and understanding that wasn't based on winning and losing. And so over a period of years, I worked in group facilitation, in community development, disaster preparedness, and sort of slowly over to a full-scale commitment to storytelling. I've taught and told stories to adults and children, and I've told a moth story a couple of times and won it a couple of times, and I've got a TEDx talk about the power and impact of personal storytelling, and I run a 2-day workshop for storytelling for women leaders, and also a brilliant storytelling night where women come and tell stories in Melbourne once a month. I'm going to start with a story, and I'm going to actually I won't start with a story. I was going to cheat and play a recording of a story that I had previously told at a live event, but I'm not going to do that because already I'm behind time, and I know you'll have places to go. So we're going to touch on creativity and having a practice, a creative practice, or ways that you can sort of have a process that's outside the internal actual storytelling process, and then we'll talk about internal story gathering, how you get it onto your into your mouth, the dip. There's always a dip. Beginnings and endings, the audience and our relationship to the audience, and the self-talk, and some of the things that can help with flow and improv, or improvising as we tell. So I've had to sort of chop out huge chunks of my reverie about creativity and why we need it and why we have it. And I'm just going to dive straight into a quote from Ira Glass. Ira Glass is a well-known audio producer and radio storyteller, and he's the host of a well-known podcast called This American Life. And he had this to say. He said, "The most important thing you can do is do a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week you will finish one story. It is only by going through a volume of work that you will close that gap, and your work will be as good as your ambitions." So he's talking about the gap between what we imagine and what we create. And this is him continuing, "And I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You've just got to fight your way through." So the crux of what he's saying there is that we need to produce a lot of work. And to do this, we need to have a regular practice. And for me, what has been a game changer in terms of my own regular practice is creating tiny habits that I try to do every day, or at least sort of 4 or 5 times a week. And they're so small that they can't not be done, but it's like keeping your hand in your practice. So they work for, so I'm going to talk about them in the context of a series of practices that also help develop creativity. And I'll also mention briefly that I use, so you've got your list of the different things you want to create or become habitual or create as part of your practice. One of the ways I track that is using technology with an app, a daily tracker app. There's weekly ones, there's lots of different ones. The one I use is called Way of Life. It's very simple. You just have a list of daily things. It I've tried others going to weekly and more complicated systems, but I keep coming back to that one. And even if you only do it 3 or 4 times a week, it's better to have done that than to do 3-hour stint once a month. It's better to build this practice because it makes it habitual. So the things that I do that help create creativity are not necessarily related to storytelling at all. First is meditation. So that's the ability to watch and separate from the incessant mind, the storytelling mind, the mind that's constantly making sense and judging. So being able to do that, and that then, to be able to settle that mind, to either give it a task like watching the breath, allows space for creativity and inspiration to come forward. So that's really important. Then writing for any of the language art, storytelling's a language art, writing's a key daily practice. And there's a few different ways of writing. It externalizes our voice, enables us to process and express ourselves, and make sense of things. And it can also be a creative and imaginative act. So there's a few different types of writing. There's journaling, which I do as a regular daily thing, and Julian Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, is a great advocate for what she calls it's almost stream of consciousness or hot writing. So you're just getting it out. You're getting a connection with words for starters. You're getting a connection with expression, and to do that in a consistent way. I've done read books, quite strictly followed different processes, and now I feel like I just have my own process, and it's I don't. I do it every day, and it's very important to me, but it's not a particular style. Then there's creative writing, and that's really imaginative stuff. So kind of, writing anything that comes, and there's loads of places you can get prompts, and doing that, so for example, there's one thing called creativewritingprompts.com, and even if you did a minute a day, you cannot not find a minute. But of course, 1 minute might lead to a bit more, or a sentence, or a paragraph. However you do it, doesn't have to be much. But so this one, you click on a number and you get a prompt, and so the one I came up with or found was begin a story with the hallway was silent. Yeah, so you write for 3 minutes on the hallway is silent. If you do that every day or 3 or 4 times a week, you're starting to build your creative muscle. And the other kind of writing is actually writing for personal storytelling, and I'll talk a bit more about that when I talk about my practice of crafting stories. So a couple of other practices: listening. So it's a truism around writing that they say you need to read. For oral storytelling, you need to listen to storytellers. The best way is to go to storytelling events, and then you get a sense of the audience and the whole dynamic that's unfolding. But you can also supplement that with listening to radio or podcasts where people have been recorded telling in a live setting. So you're getting as close as you can to that dynamic. And then there's also listening for stories. So that might be a reflective 5 minutes at the end of a day where you look back through your day and you're listening for stories that are unfolding in your own life, listening for stories that you've heard, remembering stories that you've come across or read. And you might add those to a story library. And reading whatever is in your field, reading folk tales. They're really good for structure. So all of those things. One other point to make about the sort of external of a story practice is to, so you're all presumably on this webinar because you want to learn to tell stories or tell stories better or tell more stories, but break that down into milestones and sort of stages of achievement that are simple. So the first might be, I'll go to the library and look up 398.2, which is the Dewey number for folk tales. And then it might be I'll choose a story that I love and I want to go through all the effort of telling. If you're doing a personal story, it might be I'll write for 5 minutes a day for a month. That's an achievement. Once you've done that you can say, yes, I've got to level 1. Then the level 2 might be to create a story and turn it into a storyboard. Then it might be I'm going to practice that story for a week. Like that's going to take you 5 or 10 minutes a day for a week. So just creating milestones, so that this idea of becoming a better storyteller is not this just enormous thing that's so hard to get your head around. You're breaking it down into steps. So to move from there, I'll just see if anyone's got any questions. I'm going to try and break it up a little bit with more questions along the way. Does anyone have questions? All right, if you start typing, there seems to be a bit of a lag. But so now when we go to the actual crafting process, they begin usually with remembering a moment, an image, a scene. And out from that, we might have a whole lot of other things around it, but it's that moment that is either that we're going to story around. We're going to pack out the scenes around it. It's the first moment that springs to mind is usually the climax, or it might be the inciting incident, and we'll unpack story structure in a minute. But you're going to paint a whole world around that story, around that moment, so that when you take people to that moment, they feel it as significantly as you felt it at the time that it happened. And so that's why we need to take people through steps in order to have that experience. So story structure, and the first webinar that I did, I've now put permanently on the Storywise website. So we go into it a little bit more depth in that webinar. But there's essentially there's many different sort of formulations, but the simplest one I find is a 5-part structure for a story. You have the scene setting, which is creating the world of the story. Then you'll have an inciting incident. This is where I feel the lack of having not told a story at the start, because I refer to stories to help show that. But you've got to set the scene. Then there'll be an inciting incident, and that's where something in that world, you've created this world, you've created people and characters, and then something happens in that world that leads usually to a desire. Either it's a problem or an event or something. Then from there, there's unfolding narrative, really. That's where all the action happens. In that middle, you're going through trying to figure out how to get this desire, how to unravel something, how to solve a problem. And that culminates in the climactic moment. And so that's part 4. So you've got inciting incident. So you've got setting the scene, inciting incident, the rising action, climax number 4, and then the last part. Some people have more than one at the last part, but the last part is the resolution. It's the making sense. It's the wrapping it up. It's the tying the pieces in together. Sort of structured approach to story, very quick. I also like this definition from Robert McKee, who's a script writer, or he's really a script writing teacher. He's very well known in the movie world. And he defines a story as a character who wants something and must overcome adversity to get it. So essential in that is that there's a person and that there's this struggle. So you've got your memory. You're going to now trawl your history, trawl your memory bank to create a chronology, to create a world where this moment occurs, and you're going to set that down on paper. So it's a writing task. Other people, you may not end up being a writing task. You could do it different ways. I'm just going to talk about writing because it's the most common. So after several years where I have crafted a story every month, I now do this story gathering as a micro habit. I used to get to sort of a week, maybe 3 days before the storytelling night and go, oh my goodness, I've got to have a story. And because I was the host, it was absolutely essential that I had a story. And that was always very stressful. So now when one story night finishes, when I get to my daily routine, I sit down, I cut and paste the theme for the night, put it into a document, and then I sort of brainstorm some ideas, trying to get moments. I might do that one day. The next day I might still not have found the moment that I think is going to work. I keep doing that until I do, and then once I've got the moment, I start at the beginning. And usually the beginning is, reams of backstory that'll never see the light of day, that I just have to write to kind of explain myself, to draw my memory out, to create the world that this happened in, and explain it to myself. And so I do that as a few paragraph a day. Sometimes, I used to time and count words. Now I don't. It's just I sit down and I do it for as long as I kind of have the energy and have the time. And it is such a more joyful process, because as soon as I get tired or bored, I step up and I walk away, and I've written a paragraph and I come back to it the next day fresh and with energy, and I, plow on that difficult bit. So just keep my notes in order. When I was doing that process where I'd left it to the last minute, I often didn't, I usually didn't go through the writing process. It was like, why was I going to write all that rubbish when I, wasn't ever going to see it, and I didn't have time for that. And when I told stories like that, they just weren't as good. I felt rushed, and I felt as if there was there wasn't a depth of connection between me and the story. So going back into that world and writing it out in full is a important world of the story. Writers will tell you this about their characters, but you've got to do it for your own history and to feel the connection to the story. But there's two things to remember out of all of this. One is, whatever process you find works for you is the best process. And you maybe start writing. I've played around with orally telling the story without writing at all, and I had that problem of not having the depth. And the second thing is that all of this, the other way you might do it is draw. You might draw the scenes in the story. You might do it as a mind map. If you're more inclined to visual, then that's whatever works for you. But whatever process you do at this point, you are simply gathering the materials, and it is only going to be loosely related to what you will speak. It's an exercise in remembering, in ordering, in fishing, and in fact, the more you write and the more you become attached to your written words, the more trouble you're going to have, because it's a story killer to attempt to tell your story from the words on the page. Your story becomes mediated through words, searching for words that you're trying to remember, as opposed to telling from scenes and images. And when the words mediate the story, it stiffens and it's harder to remember. You've gathered your materials, and now you're going to now your story is sitting on the page. It's kind of inert, it's fixed, and it's in danger of becoming sort of set. And you want to, as quickly as possible, get it onto the tongue. And when it's in your mouth, you'll still be, some parts will become sort of polished and firm and set, and others will be much more fluid. So my process, I always begin by standing. Often I'll take the story for a walk. So I print out my reams of story, and I might have a go at reading it. I might have a go at sort of telling it. Often I'll tell it and forget the words. When I take it for a walk, I often go through this process. It's quite time consuming, but I take all of that densely written stuff and I put it into dot points. And the dot points might be, and I handwrite usually just on some paper, and it might be 2 or 3 pages of dot points. And then I go for a walk, and I kind of get to where I've got past navigated the railway line and on the roads, and the dogs can run free, and I can concentrate, and it's kind of like, this weight, it's this effort to take what's in my mind and put it in my mouth. It's like being at the bottom of a hill, and I've got a long, hard slog, but I do. You start to speak, and I often never refer to those written words ever again. that's okay. They've gotten me to this point. So I speak the story, I speak it again, I speak it again. By the third time, often as not, am suddenly overwhelmed by despair, and that this story is just crap. I'm just in this big unstory mess, and it's never going to work, and it's just rubbish. And there's this overwhelming sense of sort of failure, and I'm an imposter, as everything rushes down. I'm an imposter as a storyteller. I'm out of my depth. The story's, and quite frankly, sometimes that feeling that you're not sure if the story's any good doesn't leave until even after I've told it in front of 300 people. I'm still unsure. And I say that because you kind of need to have hope and belief that your story's got something to offer the world, or at least one person. When I was first starting to learn about storytelling, I listened to a podcast called The Art of Storytelling by Brother Wolf. It's quite old now, but it's a rich series of interviews with North American storytellers, and many times with very experienced storytellers, they know their stories so well, they would just stand in front of an audience before they even decided what they were going to tell, but they would sense that there would be someone in the story who needed to hear, someone in the audience who needed to hear whatever story they've chosen. And they also taught me that it's a good thing to remember ourselves, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but someone needs to hear your story, and that helps us have and that you're doing heavy emotional work on behalf of the person who needs to hear it. I'll skip along, but that's important to for us to have that faith and belief as we're in our crafting process. So that's the dip, and there's no time to get another story together. You've done all this work, and so you put it on your tongue again, and I do anyway, and keep going until at some point it feels on the other side. You're coming out the other side of that dip, and it's like it's going to work. It's going to work. You've cut out this bit, you've done that, and then you start, but still at this stage it's probably 2 to 3 times as long as you're allocated. If it's on the moth, you've only got maximum 6 minutes. Other places you're going to be more. But you still need to, whittle, sharpen, find the language that you love, that feels full and round in your mouth, but that's really economical, so that, it's usually the parts of the story that are hard to explain, or that or describe, or they have complex emotions, or there's thinking and reflecting, and you want to tell people about this, but you were thinking about this thing for days, and you want to kind of, you've got to distill it into really economical language, or you might be transitioning from one scene to another, and then you want to sort of explain 3 things, but you've got to get it down so tight. So that's when you need to smooth those parts, refine them, get them right, because that will really save on your time, and it just makes for a better, tighter story. And that this process of refining and tightening and finding the right words, this is where really we need to have a relationship with our creativity, where we need to allow things to come without filter, where we need to let our imagination reach for and find the words that feel right, that string things together like notes, that see and connect images as metaphors, and find the language to explain complex emotions. And so you want to be really in flow. Forget about the rough bits. Just focus on the good bits. Feel it in your body. You're feeling relaxed in the story. No one's listening to you, and you're relaxing into the story so that you can get those words that come in the natural expression of language. It's at this point that I am recording every single time that I practice the story. It keeps me on track for timing, but it also captures those gems that come out of my mouth in the flow of speaking that I don't want to lose as quickly as I've found them. because even though stories are generally told from pictures, and the scenes and the narrative and where there's action, we will nearly always tell from pictures, there are parts where we have set words, just small parts, transitions, beginnings, endings, anywhere we've got something that we need to be really, we know it's complex, but we find the right words to hit exactly the notes or we use a metaphor, and so you want to capture those in the recording. This rolling with this flow in our story, this flow in our speaking and our language, happens in this preparing, but it also happens in the performance itself. And because it's a dynamic relationship between teller and story, and I'll go into that in more depth, but it's the same flow and creative urge and creative impulse that we're allowing. So, for example, a story I've told many times, I'd used it in community development, told it lots and lots of different places. I ended up telling it at in a school. It's about a woman who has to spends a lot of time getting close to a tiger to snip its skull. And I suddenly realised in telling this, the kids were with me. She was getting closer and closer to the tiger, and she was about to put her hand out on the tiger. We've got the scene there, and I know I've got them in we're all on the edge of our seats knowing what's going to happen. And never before had I done this, but in the moment I knew that if I roared, if I did something sudden, they would get that delicious sense that children have of and surprise. And so I did. I just went with the urge to do a big rah, and they all jumped and squealed with delight. And it's an improv. It's a thing you do in a moment because the moment is right for that. So that's that's fun. That's where you're at your storytelling best. But like all improv, the more we practice, it's a paradox to practice to improvise, but we do. So you've got your story it's got a shape, it's still a bit rough, it might be a bit long, but it feels like, this is how I feel about it, I feel like I belong in the story. Me and the story belong together, and I'm going to tell it no matter what, and so I might as well keep making it the best I can. So there's a couple of other parts, sorry, I'm running out of time, beginnings and endings, which are really important. And I'll just touch on endings. Endings, I rarely, if ever, the ending the way it will come out. Endings come, the more I practice the story, the more I live within the story, the more I learn to understand my story, the more I feel into a landing of the story, because that's essentially what your ending is. It's a landing. It's a subtle sort of sailing. It's a bit like sailing close to the wind, where you're wanting to convey your meaning without lecturing. You're wanting to convey your meaning still being within the story, without stepping outside the story and taking people into their head. So it's a fine art, that last part, but I might have a sense of the meaning, but the words them all come as I'm practicing. So now you're going to like, yeah, they didn't laugh. Comedians know this all the time. So audience, the relationship, energetic conversation is, there's a conversation that's happening between the teller, the audience, and the story itself. And there's many layers to that relationship. So some of the things that go into creating the ambience of the story or the performance are the size and the space capacity of the audience. So you get 8 people jammed into a small room and you're up the front and you're very close to those 8 people, it will feel like a big performance because the energy is close, the energy of the story and each person's energy. It's not being dissipated between people. And so it's a very intimate space. You put 1,000 people, 2,000 people scattered around the MCG and you might as well you feel like you're talking to no one. Yet you put that size audience in an auditorium and somewhere that's packed, and of course the connection, it really makes a difference. The type of, so that's the size and the capacity, the type of space. There's a reason we listen to movies in the dark with noise cushioning carpet and curtains. It's because it enfolds us, it keeps us focused, and you want to have less distractions for your audience. People going past, people moving in and out. It's you learn to deal with it, but it will distract you as a teller, and that takes your mind off and as well as your audience, because it really is an enchantment and trying to bring people into a world, and sudden noise, sudden people moving can distract. Having said that, also people, the story can hold people in quite extraordinary, distracting circumstances. The purpose, the audience have come together. If they've come to hear stories, great, they're going to be a willing and warm audience. If they've come from a business meeting, your story might shine in amongst all that data and really have people willing and wanting to hear. You'll need to be quick because their tolerance won't be that long, and you'll need to have a point. You'll need to connect it to all that logic. Is the audience, and the same thing, if you're there with a message and your story is part of a message, is the audience antagonistic to you or your message? That will make a difference. Familiarity. Do you know the audience, and does the audience know you? I know when I go to the women's storytelling nights, I don't know but I know the space and I'm comfortable there. And I host another night, and they don't know me, I don't know them, I don't know the setup. It's different. What has gone before you, what's coming after, but even at a storytelling like the Moth, the audience warms up. So if you're the first or second storyteller of the night, you won't get the same level of easy laughter and listening, moving into your story as if you're the 8th teller or the 9th teller. The audience just gets more and more willing and warm to hear you. So knowing all of those things helps us manage the next part, which is your relationship to the audience. Because you'll be influenced by the audience, because your storytelling process and respond based on your perception of what they're doing. And if your perception is not, if you think they're not listening, or you've lost them, or it's a bit wonky, then it can become this downward spiral where you get a bit of self-doubt. The audience sort of feels that, they lean back a little bit, then you feel that and you go worse, and then and before you know it, all you've got is your internal critic, just and in the meantime you're trying to deliver a story. I've been there. I'm pretty good at being oversensitive, which I have finally decided helps me be sensitive to others, but it also means that I can overstate negative. For a long time, my storytelling, I would look out to the audience, and the only person I would see would be the man with his arms crossed leaning back in his chair, and I would decide that no one was listening. Or I might see the person yawning, or the person looking down at their phone. That was all I saw in a sea of 40 people, and I would take responsibility for that. Now I'm much more inclined to look for the people who are listening, because there'll always be people who are leaning in, and I speak to those people. And if I'm lucky, there'll be the best listener in the room type person who nods, who smiles, who gives facial expressions, who's constantly, they're listening and they're encouraging you. And I try and be that listener when I'm in an audience. And I also look for and hold like precious stones that moment in telling a story that doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's like this dense silence settles like mist in a valley on the room, and you know that everyone is in that story with you, and they will not go home until they've heard the end of it, and they want to know what you think about the end of it as well. And that's gold. That's story gold. So one more aspect I want to touch on is that's related to that your relationship with the audience is this self-talk, and I'm in a kind of paradoxical expression of this part because this webinar has been a huge and agonizing learning curve for me. The first one of these webinars I did, I thought was okay. I thought it was pretty good. I spent a lot of time. The second one, in my view, was terrible. And I felt really bad after it. And then coming to this one, I kind of had that hangover of one. And I've done everything except clean the fridge in the last week to avoid preparing for this. And I gave myself the excuse this morning, the internet's not on. But I had to talk myself into believing that what I have to offer is enough, and that enough is good enough to start. And it's the same for storytelling. Perfectionism is our enemy. We're always learning and growing, and no more so than in a creative pursuit. And that's the lesson I take from sport, that we can't get better without doing or being willing to fail, miss the mark, fall over, stuff up, and we need to forgive ourselves. We're in an era where things like creative perfection do exist, in movies and books and the print media and scripted plays. It's recorded perfection, and so we measure ourselves to that. But storytelling is an imperfect art. It's a live art, and that's its beauty. I think webinars might have a higher bar, but for me, it's still about just being good enough. I'm nearly done. Some people feel their personal storytelling is a form of self-indulgence, and why would anyone listen to me? But I want to urge you to really believe that we are hungry for authenticity, to feel and see behind other people's masks, so that we can feel more connected and less alone. It's a great gift that we give, to be imperfect, to be meaningful, and to be brave, and to break down those silos. So 3 more quick points. Humility, thinking of the story as coming through you, and you're the messenger or the conduit, but you're not the star. The story is the star. Having an attitude of service helps with that, and realizing that you're being given the gift of being heard, but you're also giving a gift. Closely related is that point I said, that believing that someone in the room needs to hear your story. And finally, believing that no matter what happens, you will learn. And that's the lesson of sport, and that failure is an inevitable part of it. There's no substitute for the experience of telling stories, just like you can't learn piano without playing the piano. Learning to read and respond to an audience, learning to be aware of the stories that's inside your head about the story that you're telling outside your head. And practicing being creative in the moment. So I'm so sorry I've gone over time. We did start late. I saw a question. So that's it, folks. I saw a question. It was, what was the app? I think I saw Victoria ask that. And that of life. Thanks, Kate. You've answered that question. Excellent. So any other questions for anyone who's still with us? I can put you on. There's not too many. I'll put you on speaking, although it may become a disaster, but we'll try that. Because I know the phone people, but you can either type, or if you give from, I think you have to, some buttons to get your speaking to come through, and then anyone could speak. A few people are starting to type. Hopefully someone's on the line. Oh, no worries. Kate. Thanks, Victoria.
It's Shez, Kate.
Oh, hi, Shez. Can everyone hear? Oh, thank you, Jocelyn. Do you have a question, Shez?
No, I just wanted to say it's just really great to hear your voice and to hear what you're saying.
Great to hear your voice and to hear what you're saying. So.
Thank you. Hopefully it's it's helpful. You'll have
great to be reminded.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it reminds me as well by preparing it. So I'm just reading the notes. Yeah, absolutely, it crosses over, Kate. Yeah, especially the flow. Getting into a zone with writing, where the more you do it, the more it's the same sense of it's just come out of your fingers onto the keyboard, or when you're speaking, the orality, the words just come out of your mouth. Excellent. Very good. How long are you writing for, Kate? Do you have Kate's just written, everyone see it. Can you, you might not be able to see it if you're on, the people are on the phone. Kate said she's written, just set myself a challenge to write every day, 11 days in and going strong. So yes, very good. Well, if there's no questions, I know I will have kept people, so just jump off if you've got to go. But if you ask questions, yeah, good on you, Victoria. That's right. And I'm sorry for the patchy sound, and I hope the recording is not patchy. That would be a problem. Thanks, Vicky. Oh no, you've said that. I got mixed up. Any other questions? All right. I think you're all done. You're all silent. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for struggling with the. Thanks, Sharon. It is a beautiful day, and for struggling with the whatever it is. What is it? Technology. And hopefully it was useful. Alrighty, bye. I'm going to end the event.